In the vast expanse of a galaxy, where alien civilizations have mastered technology beyond human comprehension and waged wars for millennia, there exists one unshakable truth. Love is the most dangerous weapon of all. Commander Sarah Chun never expected to find herself kneeling in the dim maintenance bay of a stolen alien warship, her human hands trembling as they worked to repair the damaged armor of Zarathek, a warrior from a species that had been humanity's sworn enemy for over 2 decades. The war between humans and the Kethri Empire had claimed billions of lives, scorched entire worlds, and left scars across the galaxy that might never heal. But here, in this moment of impossible intimacy, as Sarah's fingers traced the intricate alien technology that kept Zara alive, something far more profound than warfare was taking shape. When Zara's voice, soft and vulnerable beneath her translator's mechanical tones, asked that simple yet earth-shattering question, Sarah realized that sometimes the greatest acts of rebellion aren't fought with weapons or strategies, but with the courage to love what you're supposed to hate. This is the story of how 2 warriors from opposite sides of an interstellar conflict discovered that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology, our stubbornness, or our capacity for violence. It's our ability to find hope, connection, and love in the darkest corners of the universe, and how that love can reshape the destiny of entire civilizations. Their story would challenge everything both species believed about themselves, their enemies, and the true meaning of strength. Because sometimes, the most human thing you can do is love someone the universe tells you is your enemy. The emergency beacon cut through space like a dying star's last breath, its distress signal barely registering on the sensors of the human reconnaissance ship Defiance. Commander Sarah Chun studied the readings with the practiced eye of someone who had survived 7 years of brutal interstellar warfare, her weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of tactical displays. "Ma'am, that's a Kethri signature," reported Lieutenant Morrison, his young voice tight with the kind of tension that came from knowing the enemy. "Could be a trap." Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of countless decisions that had brought her to this moment. The Kethri Empire had been humanity's greatest threat since first contact 23 years ago. Their advanced technology, superior numbers, and ruthless efficiency had pushed human colonies to the brink of extinction. Every tactical manual, every briefing, every instinct screamed at her to ignore the signal and continue their mission. But something about this particular distress call felt different. The signal pattern was erratic, desperate, not the controlled, tactical communications she'd learned to fear from Kethri military vessels. Analysis shows the signal is coming from a damaged escape pod, her tactical officer reported. Life signs are weak, but present. Single occupant. Sarah stared at the sensor data, her mind racing through possibilities. Standard protocol demanded they report the contact to Fleet Command and continue their reconnaissance mission. The Kethri would do the same if their positions were reversed. But as she watched the life signs flickering on her screen, growing weaker with each passing moment, she found herself thinking about Lieutenant Morrison's younger brother, killed in the Centauri massacre, about her own sister, missing and presumed dead after the Battle of Proxima Station. "Commander," Morrison's voice pulled her back to the present. "Set intercept course," she ordered, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "We're bringing them aboard." The next hour passed in tense preparation. Her crew of 15 moved with military precision, preparing the cargo bay as an impromptu medical facility while maintaining full security protocols. Sarah had served with most of these men and women for 3 years, and she trusted them with her life. But she also knew that bringing an enemy combatant aboard, even a dying one, pushed the boundaries of that trust. When they finally tractored the escape pod into their cargo bay, Sarah felt her breath catch. The pod was unlike anything in human design, its organic curves and bioluminescent panels speaking to the advanced biotechnology that made Kethri vessels so formidable. But it was also clearly dying, its systems failing as whatever catastrophe had launched it took its toll. The pod's occupant lay unconscious within a cocoon of emergency life support gel, and Sarah's first sight of her would forever change everything she thought she knew about their enemy. The Kethri warrior was tall and elegant, with the characteristic elongated limbs and graceful bone structure of her species. Her skin held an opalescent quality that shifted between deep blue and silver depending on the angle of light, and intricate bioluminescent patterns traced along her arms and face like living tattoos. But it was her wounds that made Sarah step forward without thinking. The Ketheri's armor, a marvel of biotechnology that seemed to flow like liquid metal across her body, was cracked and sparking. Beneath it, Sarah could see injuries that spoke of a desperate battle, of someone who had fought against impossible odds and somehow survived. "Is she?" Morrison began. "Alive," Dr. Hayes confirmed, running her scanner over the unconscious alien. "But barely. Her armor appears to be some kind of integrated life support system, and it's failing. If we don't stabilize her soon." Sarah found herself kneeling beside the makeshift medical bed they'd constructed, studying the intricate patterns of the failing armor. Up close, she could see that it wasn't just protective gear, but something far more complex. The armor seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, synchronized with the Ketheri's breathing, and where it was damaged, the warrior's vital signs fluctuated wildly. "Can we help her?" Sarah asked, surprised by the genuine concern in her own voice. Dr. Hayes shook her head. "This technology is completely alien to us. I can treat some of the surface injuries, but that armor, if it's as integrated with her physiology as it appears, attempting to remove it could kill her." Sarah stared at the dying warrior, her mind wrestling with emotions she couldn't quite name. This was the enemy, the face of a species that had brought humanity to its knees. But looking at her now, injured and vulnerable, Sarah saw something else entirely. She saw someone who had fought and bled and suffered just as she had. Someone who, beneath all the alien features and advanced technology, seemed remarkably human. Hours passed as the Defiance continued its course through contested space. Sarah found herself returning to the cargo bay repeatedly, drawn by something she couldn't explain. Each time, she noticed new details about their unexpected guest. The way the bioluminescent patterns on her skin seemed to dim when her vital signs dropped. The careful craftsmanship of her weapons, secured in the escape pod with the reverence of someone who respected the tools of her trade. The small personal items that spoke of a life beyond warfare, including what appeared to be a small holographic device displaying images of other Ketheri, perhaps family or friends. It was during one of these visits that the warrior finally stirred. Sarah was alone in the cargo bay, having sent the medical team to rest, when she noticed the change in the alien's breathing pattern. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin began to glow brighter, and her eyes slowly opened. Sarah had expected many things from this moment. Fear, anger, perhaps even an attempt at violence. What she didn't expect was the way the Ketheri's large, silver eyes focused on her with something that looked remarkably like gratitude. "You?" The warrior spoke, her voice emerging from a translator device integrated into her armor. The mechanical tones couldn't quite hide the weakness in her voice. "You saved me." Sarah found herself at a loss for words. She had prepared for interrogation, for threats, for the kind of cold military efficiency she'd come to associate with Ketheri forces. This quiet acknowledgement, tinged with what sounded like genuine surprise, threw her completely off balance. "You were dying," Sarah finally managed. "Your escape pod was failing." The Ketheri attempted to sit up, then fell back with a barely suppressed sound of pain. Her armor flickered, its bioluminescent elements dimming dangerously. "My name is Zarethek Vorsolani. Was a tactical specialist with the 7th Fleet. Commander Sarah Chun, Terran Defense Force," Sarah replied automatically, then immediately wondered if she'd just committed some kind of security violation. Zarethek studied her with those unsettling silver eyes. "You know what I am, what my people have done to yours. Why did you save me?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Sarah found herself truly considering it for the first time. Military doctrine, survival instincts, and 7 years of war all screamed that she should have left the escape pod to drift in the void. But something deeper, something fundamentally human, had compelled her to act. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Maybe because someone needed help, and I was in a position to provide it." Zarethek's expression was difficult to read, but something in her posture seemed to shift. The rigid military bearing relaxed slightly, replaced by something more curious than hostile. That is unexpected. My people would say such sentiment is weakness. Maybe, Sarah said, but we're not your people. A sound from the armor drew both their attention. The bioluminescent patterns were flickering more erratically now, and Sarah could see Zarathek's breathing becoming labored. Whatever damage the armor had sustained was getting worse. The integration matrix is failing, Zarathek explained, noting Sarah's concerned expression. Without proper repair, the armor will shut down completely within the next few hours. And then, Zarathek's silver eyes met hers with calm acceptance. Then I die. The matter-of-fact way she said it hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had seen that same resignation in the eyes of human soldiers who knew their wounds were fatal. It was a look that transcended species, the universal recognition of mortality that united all thinking beings. What would it take to repair it? Sarah asked. Zarathek's eyes widened slightly, the first truly surprised expression Sarah had seen from her. You would help me? I don't know, Sarah replied honestly. But I'm asking what it would take. For the next several minutes, Zarathek explained the basics of Ketheri armor technology. It was far more complex than anything in human engineering, a fusion of biotechnology and quantum mechanics that interfaced directly with the wearer's nervous system. The armor didn't just protect, it enhanced strength, speed, and healing while providing life support in hostile environments. The repair process is delicate, Zarathek concluded. It requires direct neural interface to guide the reconstruction matrices. Among my people, only bonded partners or family members can perform such repairs safely. Neural interface? Sarah's knowledge of alien technology was limited, but she understood the implications. You mean someone would have to link their mind with yours? Zarathek nodded weakly. The armor recognizes the user's neural patterns. To repair it, someone must temporarily synchronize with those patterns, become one with the system long enough to guide the self-repair functions. Sarah felt her heart racing as she considered what the alien warrior was describing. The idea of linking minds with an enemy, of temporarily sharing consciousness with someone from a species that had killed so many humans, should have been horrifying. Instead, she found herself thinking about the gradual dimming of the bioluminescent patterns, about the life slowly ebbing away on the medical bed before her. Has it ever been done between different species? She asked. Never, Zarathek replied. The risks are considerable. Neural patterns between species are too different. The attempt could kill both participants. Sarah studied the dying warrior, noting how her proud bearing couldn't quite hide the growing weakness. She thought about her crew, sleeping peacefully while their ship carried them through enemy-controlled space. She thought about the war that had consumed her adult life, the friends lost, the worlds burned. And she thought about the simple, undeniable fact that someone was dying in front of her, and she might have the power to prevent it. Explain the procedure, she said quietly. Zarathek stared at her for a long moment. You cannot be serious. The neural feedback alone could leave you permanently damaged. And even if it worked, you would be linked to the mind of your enemy. You would see my memories, my thoughts. You would know things about Ketheri military capabilities that your superiors would consider invaluable. And you would see mine, Sarah pointed out. Human military secrets, tactical information. It works both ways. Yes, Zarathek agreed. Which makes your offer even more incomprehensible. Why would you risk so much for someone who, by all logic, should be your prisoner at best? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, searching for an answer that made sense. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a conviction that surprised even her. Because that's what humans do. When someone is hurt, when someone needs help, we help. Even when it doesn't make sense. Even when it's dangerous. Maybe especially then. Zarathek's bioluminescent patterns flickered weakly, and Sarah could see the armor's systems continuing their slow failure. Time was running out. The procedure, Sarah repeated. Tell me what I need to do. With obvious reluctance, and what Sarah was beginning to recognize as growing respect, Zarathek began to explain. The armor had neural interface points along the arms and spine designed to connect with Ketheri physiology, but potentially adaptable to human nervous systems. The process would require Sarah to place her hands on specific contact points and allow the armor systems to establish a connection. Once the link is established, Zarathek explained, you will need to guide my consciousness through the repair protocols. But Sarah, Commander Chun, You must understand, the connection is total. You will experience my memories as if they were your own. You will feel my emotions, my fears, my pain. And I will experience yours. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding the magnitude of what she was considering. It wasn't just about saving a life anymore. It was about crossing a line that could never be uncrossed, about creating a connection between two individuals who should, by all rights, be enemies. How long will it take? Several hours, if it works at all, Zarathek replied. And once we begin, we cannot stop. Interrupting the process partway through would likely kill us both. Sarah stood up, pacing the small space around the medical bed as she wrestled with the decision. She could wake Dr. Hayes, could call for backup, could follow protocol, and let nature take its course. It would be the safe choice, the expected choice. But as she looked down at Zarathek, seeing the proud warrior trying to hide her growing weakness, Sarah realized that safety and expectation had never been what defined humanity's best moments. Humanity had reached the stars not because it was safe, but because they had been willing to take impossible risks for impossible dreams. All right, she said quietly. Let's do it. Zarathek's eyes widened, and, for a moment, the alien's composure cracked entirely. You cannot mean this. The risk to yourself is mine to take, Sarah finished firmly. Now tell me where to put my hands before I lose my nerve. As Zarathek guided her through the positioning, Sarah felt a strange calm settling over her. This was perhaps the most dangerous, most illogical thing she had ever attempted. But it was also, somehow, the most right. In a war that had reduced both species to their worst impulses, this felt like a chance to choose something better. Are you ready? Zarathek asked softly. Sarah placed her palms against the neural interface points on the alien's armor, feeling the strange warmth of the biotechnology beneath her skin. Ready. The connection began as a tingling sensation, like electricity dancing along her nerve endings. Then it deepened, becoming something far more profound than physical contact. Sarah felt her consciousness expanding, touching something vast and alien and utterly foreign to everything she had known. And in that first moment of contact, as their minds began to merge across the impossible gap between species, Sarah understood with crystalline clarity that nothing would ever be the same again. The neural connection hit Sarah like a tsunami of sensation and memory, threatening to wash away everything she understood about herself and reality. For a terrifying moment, she couldn't tell where her consciousness ended and Zarathek's began. Alien thoughts, emotions, and memories flooded through her mind with overwhelming intensity. She experienced the warmth of a triple-star system on skin that shifted color with emotion. She felt the pride of earning her warrior's marks in combat trials that pushed Kethri physiology beyond human endurance. She lived through the terror and exhilaration of her first space battle, seeing human ships through enemy eyes as they unleashed devastating firepower against her squadron. But beneath the alien experiences, Sarah felt something unexpected, the universal emotions that transcended species barriers. Love for family members whose bioluminescent patterns told stories of ancient lineages. Fear in the moments before battle, identical to what Sarah had felt before her first combat mission. Grief for fallen comrades whose names existed in frequencies human vocal cords couldn't reproduce, but whose loss felt as sharp as any Sarah had experienced. Focus on the repair protocols. Zarathek's voice echoed through their shared consciousness, tinged with strain. The armor systems are responding to the neural bridge, but we must guide them carefully. Sarah tried to center herself, fighting through the disorienting flood of alien experiences to find the technical information Zarathek was sharing. The armor was indeed a marvel of biotechnology, a living system that adapted and evolved with its wearer. But it was also dying, its organic components starved of the specialized nutrients they needed to maintain their complex quantum states. Through their neural link, Sarah could perceive the armor's structure in ways no human had ever imagined. It existed partially in normal space and partially in quantum dimensions that human science barely understood. The damage from whatever battle had destroyed Zarathek's ship had torn holes in this multidimensional matrix, causing cascading failures throughout the system. I can see it, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible in the cargo bay, but perfectly clear in their shared mental space. But I don't understand how to repair quantum structures. Let me guide you, Zarethek responded. Feel how the matrices want to connect. The armor knows how to heal itself, but it needs a neural pattern to follow. Sarah allowed herself to sink deeper into the connection, following Zarethek's guidance as they worked together to coax the damaged systems back to life. It was like learning to see with entirely new senses, to perceive reality through the lens of a completely different evolutionary path. As they worked, the barriers between their minds continued to dissolve. Sarah found herself experiencing Zarethek's memories not as foreign intrusions, but as part of her own narrative. She walked through crystal cities that grew from living stone, their architecture flowing in organic curves that followed principles of beauty humanity had never discovered. She participated in coming-of-age ceremonies that bound young Ketheri to the quantum consciousness of their armor, creating partnerships that would last their entire lives. But with the wonders came darkness. Sarah experienced the weight of military indoctrination that taught young Ketheri to see humans as a plague upon the galaxy. She felt the propaganda that portrayed humanity's expansion as a cancer that threatened all civilized life. She lived through briefings where human colonies were discussed not as homes to billions of sentient beings, but as strategic targets whose elimination would serve the greater good. You see now, Zarethek's mental voice was heavy with shame. You see what we were taught about your people. What I believe. Through their connection, Sarah could feel Zarethek bracing for rejection, for the hatred that such revelations should logically inspire. Instead, Sarah found herself responding with unexpected compassion. She had seen enough of Zarethek's memories to understand the context, the centuries of cultural conditioning that had shaped Ketheri perceptions of humanity. And now you see what we believe about yours, Sarah replied, sharing her own memories of human military briefings. Zarethek experienced the footage of destroyed colonies, the desperate evacuation of civilian populations, the tactical analyses that reduced Ketheri forces to target silhouettes, and threat assessments. Both warriors felt the weight of mutual understanding settling between them. They had been shaped by their respective cultures to see each other as monsters, but the neural connection made such dehumanization impossible. Through each other's memories, they experienced the fundamental truth that had been hidden by propaganda and warfare. Both species were driven by the same basic needs for survival, security, and meaning. The Matrix is stabilizing, Zarethek observed as their shared consciousness guided the armor's self-repair functions. But there are deeper damages that require more intensive work. Sarah could perceive what she meant. The armor's primary systems were responding to their efforts, but its core matrix, the quantum structure that interfaced directly with Zarethek's nervous system, had suffered critical damage. Repairing it would require them to go deeper, to merge their consciousness more completely than either had thought possible. That level of neural integration, Zarethek hesitated. Among my people, it is reserved for the most intimate of bonds, made to have chosen to share their entire existence, parents bonding with newborn offspring. To attempt it with a member of another species would be unprecedented, Sarah finished. But so was saving your life in the first place. She could feel Zarethek's conflict through their connection. The deeper level of neural sharing would expose every aspect of their personalities to each other, creating an intimacy that went beyond physical or emotional connection. They would know each other more completely than any two beings had ever known each other across species lines. There is something else, Zarethek admitted, her mental voice barely perceptible. At that level of connection, the neural patterns can influence each other. You might find yourself thinking like a Ketheri, feeling emotions that are not naturally human. And I might become more human, Sarah understood. The process changes both participants. Yes, and such changes cannot be undone. Sarah considered this as their shared consciousness continued working to stabilize the armor's failing systems. She was already feeling the effects of their limited connection, finding herself aware of quantum dimensions she had never perceived before, understanding concepts that human language couldn't adequately describe. The deeper integration Zarethek described would amplify these changes exponentially. But as she felt the armor's systems continuing their gradual failure, as she perceived Zarethek's life force slowly diminishing despite their efforts, the choice became clear. Show me how, Sarah said firmly. The deeper neural connection began with a sensation of falling, as if Sarah were plunging into an ocean of alien consciousness. But instead of drowning, she found herself learning to breathe in an entirely new medium. Her awareness expanded beyond the confines of human perception, touching quantum realities that existed in the spaces between thoughts. Through Zarathek's enhanced senses, Sarah experienced the universe as the Ketheri perceived it. Matter and energy were not separate phenomena, but aspects of a single, flowing continuum that could be influenced by properly attuned consciousness. Life was not a rare accident, but a fundamental force that shaped reality at the quantum level, creating networks of meaning that connected all sentient beings across the galaxy. This is how we experience existence, Zarathek explained, her thoughts now completely integrated with Sarah's. Why we see your people's approach to technology as crude and limited. You work against the quantum flow instead of moving with it. Sarah absorbed this revelation while simultaneously sharing her own perspective. Through her memories, Zarathek experienced humanity's different approach to existence, their stubborn refusal to accept limitations, their drive to remake reality according to their will rather than adapting to its flow. You see challenges where we see opportunities, Sarah responded. Where you work with natural forces, we overcome them. Neither approach is wrong, just different. As their consciousness merged more completely, Sarah found herself accessing memories that went beyond individual experience. Through the quantum consciousness that all Ketheri shared to some degree, she touched the vast collective memory of the species. She experienced the first time Ketheri astronomers detected humanity's expansion into space, felt their collective horror at what they perceived as a chaotic force spreading across the galaxy. But she also felt deeper currents in that collective consciousness, voices that had questioned the necessity of war, that had wondered if the strange new species might possess valuable perspectives despite their apparent barbarism. These dissenting thoughts had been suppressed by military leadership, dismissed as weakness or contamination by alien influence. There were those who wanted peace, Sarah realized, her consciousness flowing through memories of Ketheri leaders who had advocated for diplomatic contact rather than preemptive strikes. Yes, Zarathek confirmed, shame and regret coloring their shared thoughts. But they were overruled by fear. My people have spent so long perfecting their civilization that the idea of something truly different, truly chaotic, was terrifying. Sarah began to understand the deeper context of the war that had consumed both species. It wasn't just about territory or resources. It was about two fundamentally different philosophies of existence coming into conflict, each seeing the other as a threat to everything they valued. As their work on the armor's core matrix continued, Sarah found herself thinking with a hybrid consciousness that was neither fully human nor fully Ketheri. She could perceive the quantum structures that needed repair with Ketheri senses while applying human problem-solving approaches that Zarathek had never considered. Your mind, Zarathek observed with something like wonder. It moves in patterns I never imagined possible. You see solutions where I see only obstacles. And your perceptions show me realities I never knew existed, Sarah replied. Together, we're seeing possibilities that neither species has ever considered. The armor's core matrix began responding to their hybrid approach, its quantum structures slowly knitting themselves back together under the guidance of their merged consciousness. But the process was taking longer than either had anticipated, and Sarah could feel the strain on both their minds. Time seemed to flow differently in the depths of neural connection. Sarah lost track of how long they had been working, aware only of the gradual strengthening of the armor's systems and the increasingly intimate connection between their minds. They shared not just thoughts and memories now, but fundamental aspects of personality, emotional patterns that had been shaped by their respective evolutionary histories. Sarah, Zarathek's voice carried a new quality, warmer and more personal than before. I need you to know, if we don't survive this process, if something goes wrong, I am grateful, not just for your help, but for what you've shown me. I never understood what your people meant by courage until now. Sarah felt a wave of emotion that was unmistakably affection, tinged with something deeper that she was afraid to name. The neural connection had created an intimacy between them that transcended the boundaries of species, culture, and even individual identity. "We're going to survive," Sarah replied with conviction she didn't entirely feel. "Both of us. And when we do, we're going to have to figure out what this means." What means?" Sarah hesitated before responding, knowing that her next words would acknowledge a reality that neither of them was truly prepared for. "What it means that I'm falling in love with my enemy." The admission hit their shared consciousness like a shockwave. Zarathek's response was immediate and overwhelming, a flood of reciprocal emotion that confirmed Sarah's feelings were not one-sided. Through their neural link, they experienced the impossibility and inevitability of what was happening between them. "This is unprecedented," Zarathek whispered, her mental voice trembling with emotion. "In all our histories, no two beings from different species have ever bonded at this level." "Maybe that's the point," Sarah suggested. "Maybe this is what both our species have been missing. The ability to truly understand each other, to see beyond the barriers we've created." As if responding to their emotional breakthrough, the armor's core matrix suddenly surged with renewed energy. The quantum structures that had been slowly healing suddenly accelerated their repair, the entire system coming online with a harmonious resonance that seemed to celebrate the connection between its wearers. "It's working," Zarathek said with amazement. "The matrix is not just repaired, it's enhanced. I've never felt anything like this level of integration." Sarah could feel it too, a sense of completion that went far beyond mere technical success. The armor was no longer just Kethri technology. It had been fundamentally altered by their shared consciousness, becoming something new and unprecedented. As the repair process reached completion, Sarah began to feel the neural connection starting to lighten. The intense merging of consciousness that had been necessary for the deep work was no longer required, and their individual identities were slowly separating. But something remained, a permanent bridge between their minds, a connection that would endure regardless of physical distance or circumstances. They were still themselves, still fundamentally human and Kethri respectively, but they were also forever changed by what they had shared. "The others will wake soon," Sarah realized, suddenly aware that hours had passed while they worked. "My crew will find us here, and they will see a human commander who has somehow repaired alien technology," Zarathek observed. "Questions will be asked." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of reality settling back around them. They had accomplished the impossible, saved Zarathek's life, and created something unprecedented in the process. But they were still on a human military vessel, still technically on opposite sides of an ongoing war. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, though she suspected neither of them had a good answer. Zarathek attempted to sit up, her armor now functioning perfectly, its bioluminescent patterns glowing with renewed vitality. The elegant alien warrior who had been dying hours earlier was now restored to full health and capability, but her silver eyes held new depths of understanding and emotion. "Now," Zarathek said softly, "we face the consequences of choosing love over duty, and we discover whether what we've found together is strong enough to survive the weight of two civilizations' expectations." Outside the cargo bay, Sarah could hear the first sounds of her crew beginning to stir. Soon, they would have to explain the impossible, defend the indefensible, and find a way to protect what they had discovered together. But for this moment, in the space between sleeping and waking, between past and future, Sarah allowed herself to feel the warmth of the connection that still hummed between their minds. Whatever came next, they would face it together, bound by something stronger than loyalty to their respective species. The war that had brought them together was far from over. But for the first time since the conflict began, both warriors dared to hope that love might prove more powerful than hatred, that understanding might triumph over fear. The real test would begin when the rest of the galaxy learned what they had done. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside sent adrenaline coursing through Sarah's system. She had perhaps 30 seconds before her crew discovered her in the cargo bay with a fully recovered Kethri warrior, and no plausible explanation for how the alien's critical injuries had been completely healed. "Zara, you need to appear unconscious," Sarah whispered urgently, using the shortened version of her name without thinking. The intimacy of it surprised them both, but there was no time to analyze the implications. Zarathek nodded and immediately dimmed her armor's bioluminescent patterns, slowing her breathing to simulate the near-death state she had been in hours earlier. But her silver eyes remained alert, fixed on Sarah with an intensity that spoke of their shared connection. Dr. Hayes entered first, followed by Lieutenant Morrison and Chief Engineer Rodriguez. Sarah quickly moved away from Zarathek's bedside, trying to project the demeanor of a commanding officer checking on a prisoner's condition rather than someone who had just shared the most intimate experience of her life. "How is she, Commander?" Dr. Hayes asked, running her medical scanner over the seemingly unconscious alien. "Stable, but still critical," Sarah replied, hoping her voice sounded normal. "Has there been any change in her condition?" Dr. Hayes frowned at her readings. "Actually, that's strange. Her vital signs have improved significantly since my last check. The armor systems appear to be functioning much better than before." Lieutenant Morrison stepped closer, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Maybe it's some kind of Kethri trick, faking weakness to catch us off guard." Sarah felt a spike of protective anger that surprised her with its intensity. Through the neural bridge she still shared with Zarathek, she could sense the alien warrior's tension, her readiness to defend herself if the situation turned hostile. "She's unconscious and severely wounded," Sarah said firmly. "Hardly in a position to threaten anyone." "With respect, ma'am," Morrison replied, "we don't really know what Kethri are capable of when cornered. Maybe we should increase security protocols." Before Sarah could respond, the ship's communications system crackled to life. Commander Chun to the bridge immediately. Priority message from Fleet Command. Sarah's heart sank. Fleet communications in this sector were carefully monitored and scheduled. An unscheduled priority message could only mean one thing. Someone had detected their deviation from mission parameters. "I'll be right there," she responded. Looking at her crew, she added, "Continue monitoring our guest, but maintain current security measures. Dr. Hayes, keep me informed of any changes in her condition." As Sarah left the cargo bay, she felt Zarathek's presence in her mind like a warm pulse of reassurance. Their connection remained active, allowing them to share emotions and basic thoughts despite their physical separation. It was simultaneously comforting and terrifying to realize that this link might be permanent. On the bridge, Communications Officer Park looked tense as she handed Sarah the decoded message. "It came through on a secure command channel, ma'am. Authentication codes check out." Sarah read the message with growing dread. "Flash priority. Eyes only * Commander Chun. Intelligence reports indicate possible capture of high-value Kethri asset in your operational area. Directive modification. Abandon current mission parameters. Proceed immediately to rendezvous coordinates. Specialized interrogation team standing by. * classification. Absolute priority * Admiral Reyes commanding * Sarah felt her blood turn cold. Somehow, Fleet Command had learned about Zarathek. The message made it clear that they weren't interested in treating her as a regular prisoner of war. The mention of specialized interrogation suggested something far more sinister. "Ma'am," Park asked, noting Sarah's expression, "are the new orders?" Sarah forced herself to maintain composure while her mind raced. Admiral Reyes was known for his ruthless efficiency and his particular hatred of the Kethri. If he got his hands on Zarathek, especially with her knowledge of advanced armor technology and tactical information, the interrogation would be brutal and likely fatal. "Set course for the rendezvous coordinates," Sarah ordered, knowing she was buying time rather than solving the problem. Maximum efficiency burn. As the Defiance changed course, Sarah felt Zarathek's growing alarm through their neural connection. The alien warrior couldn't understand the human words, but she could sense Sarah's distress and the danger it implied. Over the next few hours, Sarah struggled with an impossible decision. Her duty as a Terran Defense Force officer was clear: deliver valuable intelligence assets to Fleet Command for processing. But her connection to Zarathek made that choice morally unbearable. She had touched the alien's mind, experienced her memories and emotions, felt the depth of her character. The idea of turning her over to Admiral Reyes's interrogators felt like a betrayal of everything they had shared. The solution came from an unexpected source. Chief Engineer Rodriguez approached Sarah during her shift change, his expression troubled. "Commander, I need to report a problem with the hyperdrive motivators," he said carefully. "We're going to need to drop out of hyperspace for emergency repairs." Sarah studied her chief engineer's face, recognizing something beyond mechanical concerns in his expression. Rodriguez had served with her for 3 years and had never given her reason to doubt his technical assessments. "How serious?" she asked. "Serious enough that proceeding to rendezvous without repairs could result in catastrophic system failure," Rodriguez replied. His eyes held a significance that suggested he understood more about the current situation than he was letting on. "Do what you need to do, Chief," Sarah said quietly. "How long for repairs?" "Could be several days, ma'am. Maybe longer, depending on what we find when we tear down the motivator assembly." Sarah nodded, understanding the gift she was being offered. Rodriguez was giving her time, creating a legitimate reason to delay their arrival at the rendezvous point. Whether he suspected the truth about Zarathek or was simply following his instincts about his commander's judgment, he was risking his own career to support her. "Begin repairs immediately," she ordered. "I'll inform Fleet Command of the delay." That night, as the ship drifted in empty space with its hyperdrive officially disabled, Sarah made her way back to the cargo bay. She found Zarathek sitting up, no longer pretending unconsciousness, her armor's patterns glowing softly in the dim lighting. "Your people have found us," Zarathek observed quietly. It wasn't a question. The neural link had allowed her to sense the general nature of Sarah's distress. "They want to interrogate you," Sarah confirmed. "Admiral Reyes specializes in extracting information from captured enemies. His methods are thorough." Zarathek nodded calmly. "I have heard of this Reyes. Among my people, he is known as the Torturer of Worlds. His reputation precedes him even into Kethri space." Sarah felt sick. The casual way Zarathek accepted her likely fate spoke to a warrior's pragmatism, but it also highlighted the horror of what Sarah was being asked to facilitate. "There might be another option," Sarah said slowly, her mind working through possibilities that would have been unthinkable days earlier. "We could claim you died during transport. Arrange an escape pod. Make it look like you jettisoned yourself into space rather than face interrogation." Zarathek's bioluminescent patterns shifted to express surprise. "You would help me escape? That would be treason against your own people." "Would it?" Sarah challenged. "Or would it be choosing to do what's right instead of what's expected?" Through their neural connection, Sarah could feel Zarathek's emotional turmoil. The alien warrior was torn between gratitude for Sarah's offer and her own military conditioning that insisted accepting such help would be dishonorable. "If I escape," Zarathek said carefully, "I would be obligated to return to my own forces, to report what I've learned about human capabilities and intentions. Your offer of mercy could result in the deaths of many of your people." Sarah had already considered this dilemma. "And if you're captured and tortured, any information you give Reyes will be used to kill Kethri. Either way, people die. But this way, you become complicit in my people's future actions," Zarathek pointed out. "How can you live with that responsibility?" The question cut to the heart of Sarah's moral struggle. She had been trained to think in terms of sides, of us versus them, of actions that serve humanity's interests versus those that serve the enemy. But her connection to Zarathek had shattered those simple distinctions. "Because," Sarah said finally, "I've seen inside your mind. I know who you are beneath the uniform and the species' loyalty. You're not a monster or a tactical asset. You're a person who deserves better than being tortured for information by either side." Zarathek's silver eyes studied Sarah intently. "And what if I told you that escape is not my only option? What if there was a third choice that could serve both our people's interests?" Sarah felt a pulse of excitement and apprehension through their neural link. "What are you talking about?" "The armor repair we performed has done more than save my life," Zarathek explained. "The integration of human neural patterns has created something unprecedented. I can now interface with human technology in ways that should be impossible." To demonstrate, Zarathek placed her hand on a nearby control panel. Immediately, the ship's systems began responding to her touch in ways that defied understanding. Tactical displays activated without commands, sensor arrays recalibrated themselves to new parameters, and the ship's computer began processing information at dramatically increased speeds. "The quantum consciousness matrix of my armor has been permanently altered by our connection," Zarathek continued. It can now bridge the gap between human and Kethri technology. Do you understand what this means? Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If Zarathek could interface with both human and Kethri systems, she could potentially serve as a translator between the technologies, opening possibilities for cooperation that had never existed before. You're talking about becoming a living bridge between our species, Sarah realized. Exactly, but not alone. Zarathek's patterns shifted to express deep emotion. The neural pathways we created work both ways. You've been changed as much as I have. You can now perceive quantum dimensions, understand the flow of consciousness through technology. Together, we could demonstrate that cooperation between our species is possible. The audacity of the proposal took Sarah's breath away. Instead of choosing between loyalty to humanity and mercy to an individual enemy, Zarathek was suggesting they transcend the conflict entirely. They could become living proof that the war between their species was based on misunderstanding rather than irreconcilable differences. The risks, Sarah began, are enormous, Zarathek acknowledged. Both our peoples would see us as traitors initially. We would be hunted by both sides, trusted by neither. But, Sarah, think about what we could accomplish if we succeeded. How many lives we could save by proving that understanding is possible. Through their neural connection, Sarah could feel the depth of Zarathek's conviction. This wasn't a desperate gamble by a cornered prisoner, but a carefully considered proposal from someone who had experienced firsthand the possibility of genuine cooperation between their species. My crew, Sarah said thoughtfully. They already suspect something unusual happened during the armor repair. If we're going to do this, we'll need their support. Or at least their silence, Zarathek agreed. Do you trust them? Sarah considered her 15 crew members, people she had served with for years, who had followed her orders without question even when those orders seemed questionable. With my life. The question is whether they'll trust me with theirs. Over the next several hours, Sarah carefully approached each crew member individually, testing their loyalties and gradually revealing the scope of what she was considering. The conversations were difficult and emotionally charged. Some, like Lieutenant Morrison, initially reacted with shock and accusations of treason. Others, like Dr. Hayes and Chief Rodriguez, seemed to have suspected that something extraordinary had occurred during the armor repair. The breakthrough came when Sarah decided to demonstrate the reality of what she and Zarathek had accomplished. With Zarathek's help, she showed her crew how their combined abilities could enhance the ship's systems beyond human technological limits. Sensor range expanded dramatically, power efficiency increased by orders of magnitude, and navigation systems achieved precision that bordered on the miraculous. This is impossible, whispered Communications Officer Park as she watched data processing speeds that exceeded the ship's design capabilities. How are you doing this? By proving that human and Kethri technologies aren't incompatible, Sarah explained. They're complementary. We've been fighting a war based on the assumption that our species can coexist, but what if that assumption is wrong? The debate that followed stretched through the night cycle. Crew members grappled with conflicting loyalties, fear of the unknown, and the magnitude of what Sarah was proposing. Some argued for following orders and delivering Zarathek to Fleet Command. Others supported the escape plan. But gradually, a consensus emerged around the most audacious option of all. If we do this, Chief Rodriguez said, finally, we're not just committing treason. We're declaring ourselves citizens of something that doesn't exist yet. Some kind of alliance between human and Kethri that exists only in our imaginations. Maybe, Sarah acknowledged. Or maybe we're creating the foundation for something that needs to exist. Maybe we're choosing to be the change we want to see in the galaxy. Lieutenant Morrison, who had been silent for the last hour of discussion, finally spoke up. I joined the Defense Force to protect humanity from threats. But if what you're showing us is real, if cooperation is possible, then maybe the greatest threat to humanity is the war itself. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. The crew of the Defiance chose to abandon their mission, their allegiances, and their old understanding of the galaxy. They chose to trust their commander's vision of something better. But as they prepared for what would either be the beginning of a new era or a spectacular act of mutual destruction, none of them noticed the small listening device that had been monitoring their conversations. Admiral Reyes had not survived 20 years of military service by trusting subordinates completely, and his suspicions about Commander Chen's delayed arrival had prompted him to activate certain fail-safes. The trap was already being prepared, and Sarah's bold gamble for peace was about to face its first and most dangerous test. As the Defiance began moving toward a rendezvous point that Sarah and Zarathek had chosen, both warriors felt the weight of history resting on their shoulders. They had crossed lines that could never be uncrossed, made choices that would echo through generations. Whether those echoes would be celebrations of peace or funeral dirges for idealistic fools remained to be seen. The ambush came 12 hours after the Defiance emerged from hyperspace at what should have been a safe rendezvous point in neutral territory. Sarah was on the bridge, working with Zarathek to demonstrate their enhanced technological capabilities to the crew when the sensor alarms began shrieking with desperate urgency. Multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace, reported Lieutenant Park, her voice tight with professional alarm. 12 vessels mixed human and... Wait, that's impossible. Sarah felt her heart sink as the tactical display populated with hostile signatures. Admiral Reyes hadn't just prepared a trap. He had somehow convinced Kethri forces to participate. The approaching fleet included 6 human dreadnoughts and 6 Kethri warships, their combined firepower more than sufficient to reduce the Defiance to atoms. "They're hailing us on all frequencies," Park continued. "Both human and Kethri command protocols." Sarah exchanged a look with Zarathek, feeling the alien warrior's shock and betrayal through their neural connection. Neither had expected their respective military hierarchies to cooperate so quickly, but the evidence was undeniable. Both sides had decided that the unprecedented alliance between their species represented a threat greater than their mutual hatred. "Put them through," Sarah ordered, steeling herself for what was to come. Admiral Reyes's weathered face appeared on the main screen, his cold eyes reflecting the calculating intelligence that had made him one of humanity's most effective military commanders. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a figure that made Zarathek's bioluminescent patterns flare with recognition and horror. Fleet Commander Zintherox, one of the Kethri Empire's most ruthless strategists. "Commander Chun," Admiral Reyes began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You will prepare to surrender immediately. Your vessel will be boarded, and you will transfer custody of the Kethri prisoner to joint human Kethri custody." Sarah found her voice despite the magnitude of what she was facing. "Admiral, I don't understand. Since when does the Terran Defense Force cooperate with enemy forces?" "Since one of our own officers demonstrated the catastrophic security threat posed by human Kethri cooperation," Reyes replied coldly. "Did you really think your communications weren't being monitored? Every word spoken on your ship for the past 48 hours has been recorded and analyzed." The betrayal hit Sarah like a physical blow. Every conversation with her crew, every moment of vulnerability and hope had been fed directly to military intelligence. But worse than the violation of privacy was the realization that her attempt to build bridges had instead convinced both sides that such cooperation was too dangerous to allow. Fleet Commander Zintherox stepped forward, her voice emerging through a translation device that couldn't quite mask the alien harmonics of her speech. "The subject, designated Zarathek Vorsolani, has committed the gravest of crimes against both our species. She has allowed alien contamination of her neural matrix, compromising the purity of Kethri consciousness. She must be cleansed through ritual execution." Sarah felt Zarathek's terror spike through their connection. Ritual execution among the Kethri was a slow, agonizing process designed to purge alien influence from the quantum consciousness. It was considered a fate worse than death, a complete erasure of individual identity. "And what about my crew?" Sarah demanded. "They're guilty of nothing more than following my orders. Your crew will be subjected to extensive psychological evaluation and neural scanning," Admiral Reyes replied. "If they can be cleared of alien contamination, they may be allowed to return to duty under strict supervision. If not," he shrugged, leaving the implication clear. Sarah looked around her bridge at the people who had chosen to trust her vision of a better future. Lieutenant Morrison met her eyes with quiet courage, while Dr. Hayes offered a slight nod of continued support. Chief Rodriguez's expression was grim, but determined. They had known the risks when they made their choice, but facing the reality of those consequences was still devastating. "You have 30 seconds to comply," Syntherox added. "After that, both fleets will open fire. Your deaths will serve as an example to others who might consider such contamination." Sarah felt time slowing around her as she considered their options. The Defiance was a reconnaissance vessel, lightly armed and completely outmatched by the combined fleet surrounding them. Conventional tactics offered no hope of escape or survival. But as she reached out through her neural connection to Zarathek, she realized they did have one option that neither fleet would be expecting. "Zara," she whispered, knowing the alien warrior would hear her through their mental link. "The quantum consciousness matrix in your armor. Can you expand it to encompass the entire ship?" Through their connection, Sarah felt Zarathek's immediate understanding of what she was proposing. It was theoretically possible to extend the quantum field that interfaced with consciousness to include multiple minds simultaneously. But the risks were enormous. Such an expansion could burn out both their neural systems permanently, or worse, create a feedback loop that would destroy the consciousness of everyone aboard. "It has never been attempted," Zarathek responded mentally. "The quantum matrices were never designed to support so many simultaneous connections. But it's possible. Perhaps. But, Sarah, even if it works, we would be permanently linking the minds of every person aboard this ship. Human and Kethri consciousness forced into the same quantum space. The psychological trauma alone could create something unprecedented," Sarah finished. "A truly integrated crew, capable of cooperation that neither species has ever imagined." Through their connection, Sarah felt Zarathek's mixture of terror and excitement at the prospect. It was the ultimate test of their theory that cooperation between the species was possible. If they succeeded, they would create living proof that human and Kethri consciousness could not only coexist, but enhance each other. If they failed, they would all die in a spectacular display of the very impossibility they were trying to disprove. "Time's up, Commander," Admiral Reyes announced. "Prepare to be boarded." Sarah looked around her bridge one last time, meeting the eyes of each crew member. These people had already chosen to trust her with their lives. Now she was asking them to trust her with their very identities. "All hands, this is the commander," Sarah announced over the ship's communication system. "In approximately 30 seconds, we're going to attempt something that has never been tried before. We're going to prove that human and Kethri minds can work together as one. The process will be intense. Anyone who wants to object has 15 seconds to speak up." The silence that followed was profound. Not a single voice raised an objection, though Sarah could see the fear in her crew's eyes. They were choosing to follow her into the unknown, trusting that their shared vision of cooperation was worth any sacrifice. "Zara," Sarah said aloud, no longer hiding their connection from her crew. "Are you ready?" The Kethri warrior stood, her armor's bioluminescent patterns blazing with determination. "Ready, my friend, my partner." The quantum expansion began as a gentle tingling sensation, like electricity dancing across every nerve ending simultaneously. But it quickly intensified beyond anything Sarah had experienced during their initial connection. Instead of touching one alien mind, her consciousness suddenly exploded outward to encompass 15 different human perspectives and one utterly foreign Kethri viewpoint. The initial shock of connection hit the crew like a psychological tsunami. Lieutenant Morrison's military discipline crashed against Dr. Hayes's scientific curiosity. Chief Rodriguez's practical engineering mindset merged chaotically with Communications Officer Park's intuitive understanding of information flow. Each crew member experienced the other's memories, fears, hopes, and dreams in an overwhelming flood of shared consciousness. But through it all, Sarah and Zarathek served as anchoring points, their prior experience with neural connection allowing them to guide the chaotic merger of minds towards something resembling stability. Gradually, the crew began to adapt to their new shared existence, learning to distinguish their individual thoughts from the collective consciousness while still benefiting from their enhanced understanding of each other. The transformation was visible even to the hostile fleets surrounding them. The Defiance itself began to change, its systems responding to the collective will of its integrated crew. Power efficiency increased dramatically as human engineering intuition merged with Ketheri quantum understanding. Sensor arrays achieved impossible resolution as multiple perspectives combined to perceive reality in ways no single mind could accomplish. Most dramatically, the ship's defensive capabilities expanded far beyond its original design parameters. The quantum consciousness field that now permeated the vessel created a barrier that conventional weapons couldn't penetrate, deflecting energy blasts and projectiles through manipulation of local spacetime. Impossible, Admiral Reyes breathed as his fleet's initial weapons barrage was effortlessly turned aside. No ship that size should be able to generate that level of defensive field. But fleet commanders in Therox understood what she was witnessing with horrified fascination. It is not the ship that defends itself, Admiral. It is the crew. They have merged their consciousness into a single quantum matrix. They're no longer individually human or Ketheri. They have become something else. Through their collective consciousness, the crew of the Defiance experienced the fleet's confusion and growing fear. They could perceive the tactical communications between human and Ketheri commanders, feel the uncertainty that was beginning to fracture their temporary alliance. This is our chance, Sarah thought to the collective consciousness. We can demonstrate that cooperation makes us stronger, not weaker. But we have to be careful not to appear threatening. Instead of fleeing or counterattacking, the Defiance began transmitting on all frequencies simultaneously. But the transmission wasn't just audio or visual. It was a direct consciousness-to-consciousness communication that carried the full emotional impact of their shared experience. Every person aboard the surrounding vessels suddenly found themselves experiencing memories and emotions from the Defiance crew. They felt Lieutenant Morrison's journey from hatred to understanding as he experienced Zarathek's memories of loss and sacrifice. They shared Dr. Hayes's scientific wonder as she perceived the universe through Ketheri quantum senses. They felt Chief Rodriguez's practical amazement as human and alien technologies enhanced each other beyond their individual limitations. Most powerfully, they experienced Sarah and Zarathek's love story, feeling the profound connection that had grown between two warriors from opposite sides of an impossible war. The transmission carried not just the fact of their relationship, but the deep emotional reality of it, the trust, the sacrifice, the mutual growth that had transformed them both. The effect on both fleets was immediate and profound. Hardened military personnel found themselves weeping openly as they experienced the depth of connection possible between the species they had been trained to hate. Tactical officers struggled to maintain firing solutions as they felt the genuine affection and respect flowing between human and Ketheri consciousness aboard the Defiance. Admiral, one of Reyes's subordinates reported with a shaking voice, the crew is requesting permission to stand down. They're saying they can't fire on the ship after what they just experienced. Similar reports were coming from the Ketheri vessels as their crews struggled to process the reality of successful human-Ketheri integration. The transmission from a Defiance had shattered preconceptions on both sides, forcing them to confront the possibility that their species' fundamental incompatibility might be a lie. But Admiral Reyes and fleet commanders in Therox were not so easily swayed. Both commanders had built their careers on the assumption of eternal warfare between the species, and the success of the Defiance experiment threatened everything they believed about the nature of the conflict. All vessels, ignore the alien contamination, Reyes ordered harshly. That ship represents an existential threat to human purity. It must be destroyed at all costs. Agreed, Zentherox transmitted to her own fleet. The abomination cannot be allowed to spread its corruption further. Maximum firepower, all vessels. But as the combined fleets prepared for a concentrated assault, something unexpected happened. Several ships on both sides simply refused to fire. The consciousness-to-consciousness transmission from the Defiance had created an epidemic of understanding that was spreading faster than either commander could contain. Sir, reported the tactical officer aboard Admiral Reyes's flagship, the determination and righteous fury are refusing to acknowledge firing orders. Their captains are requesting direct communication with the experimental vessel. Similar defections were occurring among the Kethri fleet as individual ship commanders chose understanding over blind obedience. The careful alliance between human and Kethri military leadership was fracturing under the weight of evidence that cooperation was not only possible, but beneficial. In the midst of this chaos, Sarah felt a new presence touching their collective consciousness. It was another Kethri mind, but not one from the enemy fleet. Through their enhanced perception, the Defiance crew realized they were receiving a transmission from deep within Kethri space, from someone with the authority to challenge fleet commanders in Therox directly. "I am High Counselor Vishkarvani," the new voice announced, its alien harmonics somehow conveying both great age and greater wisdom. Word of this unprecedented cooperation has reached the highest levels of Kethri society. By order of the Quantum Council, all Kethri vessels are to stand down immediately. Fleet commanders in Therox's rage was visible even through the static of interstellar communication. "High Counselor, these beings have contaminated our sacred consciousness protocols. They must be cleansed. They have demonstrated something we thought impossible," Veltar corrected firmly. "The Quantum Council wishes to study this phenomenon, not destroy it. You will withdraw your forces and return to base immediately." As the Kethri fleet began powering down weapons and preparing to withdraw, Admiral Reyes found himself increasingly isolated. His human allies were abandoning firing positions, and his chain of command was fracturing as news of the successful integration experiment spread through military channels. The final blow came when Sarah received an encrypted transmission from an unexpected source. Admiral Vega, Reyes' own superior and one of the highest-ranking officials in the Terran Defense Force. "Commander Chun," Admiral Vega's weathered face appeared on their screen. "I've been monitoring this situation from Earth. What you've accomplished aboard the Defiance changes everything we thought we knew about the nature of this conflict." "Admiral Vega," Reyes interjected angrily. "This crew has committed treason of the highest order. They've compromised human genetic purity and demonstrated classified capabilities to enemy forces." "They've demonstrated that maybe we don't have to be enemies," Vega replied calmly. "Commander Chun, I'm ordering you to proceed to Earth immediately. The Defense Council wants to study what you've accomplished and determine if it can be replicated." Through their collective consciousness, the crew of the Defiance felt a surge of hope and relief. They had survived the immediate crisis, but more importantly, they had planted seeds of change in both human and Kethri military hierarchies. The path forward would still be dangerous and uncertain, but they were no longer alone in believing that cooperation was possible. As the hostile fleets dispersed and the Defiance set course for Earth, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. They had faced the ultimate test of their theory and not only survived, but begun to prove their point on a galactic scale. But through her connection to Zarathek, she could feel the alien warriors' lingering concern. They had won this battle, but the war between their species was far from over. And there would be those on both sides who would see their success as a threat that needed to be eliminated permanently. The real challenge would be convincing two entire civilizations to abandon millennia of evolutionary programming in favor of something unprecedented and uncertain. The crew of the Defiance had become living proof that such transformation was possible, but proving it and implementing it across billions of individuals were very different challenges. As they traveled toward an uncertain future, 16 minds linked in unprecedented harmony, they carried with them the hopes of two species and the weight of a galaxy's destiny. 6 months after the Defiance arrived at Earth, the small research station orbiting Luna had become the most heavily guarded and closely monitored facility in human space. Sarah stood before the massive observation windows of Laboratory 7, watching as teams of human and Kethri scientists worked together in ways that would have been unimaginable a year ago. The transformation had not been easy. The initial integration process that had linked the Defiance crew's consciousness remained the only successful example of complete human Kethri mental fusion, but the research it had enabled was revolutionizing both species' understanding of consciousness, technology, and cooperation. "The quantum resonance patterns are stabilizing," reported Dr. Elizabeth Vance, the human scientist leading the consciousness integration project. Beside her, her Ketheri counterpart, researcher Quinther Volsoren, manipulated holographic displays with graceful movements that still seemed like magic to most humans. Sarah felt a familiar warmth as Zarathek approached, her presence immediately recognizable through their permanent neural link. Over the past months, their connection had deepened rather than diminished, creating a partnership that served as both inspiration and template for the broader cooperation efforts. The High Council's response arrived this morning. Zarathek reported, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to express cautious optimism. They're willing to expand a research exchange program. 20 more Ketheri scientists will be joining the project next month. Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. Every step forward came with new challenges. The hardliners on both sides remained convinced that cooperation was impossible at best, treasonous at worst. Admiral Reyes, though officially removed from active duty, continued to lobby against the integration programs. Similarly, fleet commanders in Thurox had gathered a faction within the Ketheri military that viewed any cooperation as contamination. But progress was undeniable. The technologies developed through human Ketheri cooperation were advancing both civilizations by decades in mere months. Medical breakthroughs that combined human genetic knowledge with Ketheri quantum healing had eliminated dozens of previously incurable diseases. Agricultural innovations were turning barren worlds into gardens. Most dramatically, joint exploration missions were mapping the galaxy with unprecedented speed and accuracy. There's something else, Zarathek continued, her patterns now shifting to express nervousness. Admiral Vega wants to see us both. He mentioned something about a new assignment. Sarah felt a familiar flutter of concern. Over the past 6 months, she and Zarathek had served primarily as research subjects and consultants, their unique connection providing insights that advanced the cooperation project. But they had both known that eventually their expertise would be needed for more active roles. They found Admiral Vega in the station's command center, studying tactical displays that showed the current positions of human and Ketheri fleets throughout the galaxy. The old soldier looked up as they entered, his expression mixing respect with the kind of wariness that came from dealing with forces beyond conventional understanding. Commander Chun, Specialist Zarathek. He greeted them formally. Sarah had been promoted to full commander despite the unusual circumstances of her service, while Zarathek had been granted special status as a liaison specialist. I have a mission that requires your unique capabilities. The tactical display shifted to show a star system near the galactic rim, far from both human and Ketheri core territories. The Andromedans, Admiral Vega explained, referring to a third alien species that both humans and Ketheri had encountered only recently. They've been observing our conflict for decades, apparently waiting to see which side would emerge victorious, so they could negotiate with the survivors. Sarah studied the display, noting the massive alien structures visible in the system. The Andromedans possessed technology that made both human and Ketheri capabilities look primitive, but they had remained neutral throughout the war. Recent intelligence suggested they were finally ready to make contact with both species simultaneously. First contact protocol? Sarah asked. More complicated than that, Admiral Vega replied. They've specifically requested to meet with what they call the bridge consciousness, U2. Apparently, word of your integration success has spread further than we thought. The Andromedans see you as proof that different forms of consciousness can successfully merge without losing their essential characteristics. Zarathek's patterns shifted to express intrigue. They want to study us. They want to learn from you, Admiral Vega corrected. Intelligence indicates the Andromedans have been struggling with their own internal divisions for millennia. They're hoping that the techniques you've developed might help them resolve conflicts within their own species. Sarah felt the magnitude of the opportunity settling around her. If they could help the Andromedans achieve internal harmony while simultaneously demonstrating the success of human Ketheri cooperation, it could establish the foundation for a true galactic alliance. But the risks were equally enormous. Failure could set back cooperation efforts by generations. What about the Defiance crew? Sarah asked. They're as much a part of this success as we are. They'll be coming with you, Admiral Vega assured her. The Andromedans want to study the group consciousness you've all achieved. This could be the most important diplomatic mission in galactic history. Over the next month, preparations for the Andromedan mission consumed everyone's attention. The Defiance underwent extensive upgrades, incorporating both human and Ketheri technologies in ways that created something entirely new. The ship's systems now operated through a hybrid consciousness interface that allowed the entire crew to function as a single, unified entity when necessary. The crew themselves had also evolved beyond their original integration. Lieutenant Morrison had developed an intuitive understanding of Ketheri tactical philosophy that made him one of the most effective strategic planners in either fleet. Dr. Hayes could perceive biological systems through quantum senses that revealed healing possibilities no human physician had ever imagined. Each crew member had been fundamentally changed by their shared consciousness experience, becoming bridges between species in their own right. But it was Sarah and Zarathek's relationship that continued to serve as the most powerful symbol of what cooperation could achieve. Their love had deepened and evolved beyond anything either species had previously experienced, creating a bond that transcended not just cultural differences but the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. "Are you nervous?" Zarathek asked as they stood in their shared quarters aboard the upgraded Defiance, watching the stars shift past their viewport as they approached the edge of known space. Sarah considered the question carefully. Terrified, she admitted, but also hopeful. A year ago,